Okay, members. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Daniel Belton, Councillor Andrew Cross and Councillor James Gooding. Are there any other apologies? Substitute members, Councillor Richard Linden substituting for Councillor Andrew Cross and Councillor Ian Foster substituting for Councillor Mrs Danielle Belton. Thank you. Non-members attending, Councillor Mrs Julie Gooding, Councillor Michael Hoy, Councillor James Newport and Councillor Jim Cripps. Members, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December. Can I ask, are these noted and agreed, members? Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I take you to page 4 and page 5 in respect of the key decisions document and the work plan. Firstly, on the key decisions document, I think it says there reference to the fact that in the next iteration of this document that we reference to the Clements Hall location. I might have missed it, but I couldn't see it offhand. If anyone is able to point it to me on the key decisions document, I presume that's the one at the back of tonight's agenda. And also on the work plan, the meeting in the work plan that we considered at our meeting on the 5th of December, it quite clearly shows the agenda for the 9th of January. And if by magic all those items from a council meeting on the 9th of agenda appear on a very hefty document tonight. And it's a bit of a disappointment to see meetings cancelled and then a very hefty agenda. And I'm sure you agree with me, Madam Chair, but that's an observation, but I would be interested on the Clements Hall reference. Thank you.
Thank you. I do concur with you, Councillor Wotton, and I apologise that the meeting was cancelled. Unfortunately, officers advised and we couldn't do anything else. Would you like to comment, somebody, on Clements Hall? Any officers? No?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. In the absence of any other hands up to respond, I'll just say that I'll take that away to the executive because, of course, the executive is the body that determines the key decisions document.
Councillor Wotton.
Well, my question was, Madam Chair, have I missed it? Because I might have missed it, but is it there? Can anyone else see it on the current iteration of the key decision document?
Chair, if I may, I can confirm it's not on the published version.
Councillor Wotton, that will be taken back to the executive that it's missing. Thank you. Did I see another hand raised? Sorry. Members, back to the agenda. Item number 5, to receive declarations of interest. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've received advice that I should absent myself from item 6 and 7 because as I was part of the process that you're examining, I would obviously be predetermined. So I will leave the hall then. Thank you. Actually, I might as well leave now.
Thank you, Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Mason, where will you be? Because then we can send an officer to find you. Okay. Okay. Correct. Thank you. Agenda item 6 is our 2024-25 budget and 2024-29 medium-term financial strategy. Tim Willis, our officer, will introduce this report. Councillor Hoy is also in attendance and may assist with any of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, members. This sets out the budget for next year, 24-25, and the medium-term financial strategy, which has been extended to 5 years up to 28-29. The headlines are a proposed council tax increase of 2.99%, no borrowing over the medium-term financial strategy, fees and charges for next year generally rising with inflation, a balanced budget for next year, as well as a balanced budget for the year after and the year after that, with no use of reserves to support those budgets. And this demonstrates a sound and responsible approach to managing the council's finances, despite severe pressure on budgets largely as a result of inflation. There is a great deal of uncertainty regarding the economic backdrop and government funding for the budget and the medium-term financial strategy. We can maintain our minimum level of working balances of 10% of net revenue expenditure as per council policy and acceptable to me as the Section 151 officer when writing the assurance statement for council and over the medium term. The table on page 6.9 summarises the budgets for the 5 years. There are projected shortfalls in years 4 and 5. Whilst these shortfalls are of some concern, they are only predictions in the context of substantial uncertainty. Despite this uncertainty, we nonetheless wish to highlight some of the actions planned over the medium term, which are designed to generate income and reduce costs, which are set out on pages 6.7 and 6.8. On the capital programme, there is a 5-year capital programme presented, and to avoid borrowing, we are using receipts from asset sales and earmarked reserves. The earmarked reserves that are to be used to fund the capital programme come from the revenue budget, sometimes building them up when we can, then to spend on investment. The amount of reserves available to fund the capital programme will become exhausted over the medium-term financial strategy period. This has been recognised by limiting the programme over the 5 years. Whilst we've identified some specific schemes, a number of others will be subject to a value for money assessment starting next financial year in 24-25 to decide which should be prioritised. This is explained and quantified on page 6.14. So there's very little room for manoeuvre. We continue to strive for efficiencies, but there are ongoing cost increases and pressures on income. Any spare funding is being used to support investment in assets and services. But the overall position is delicate, so any significant unfunded cost could prompt the need to reduce services or to borrow. If the council tax increase was reduced by 1%, it would cost the council £450,000 over the MTFS period, and £90,000 a year every year thereafter. Our earmarked reserves are set out on page 6.17, and they demonstrate how reserves are used to fund the capital programme. At the start of this year, they stood at about 13.3 million, but they are projected to be just below 5 million at the end of next year. The use of these reserves is planned, and they're not being used to fund ongoing expenditure, only one-off costs. But their projected reduction does highlight how this council, along with most other councils across the country, is having to utilise reserves to sustain services and investment therein. The process from this point is for this scrutiny committee to scrutinise the proposals, make any recommendations to the executive, and the executive will meet on the 8th of February to consider these recommendations and then finalise its proposed budget and MTFS to the council, which will meet on the 20th of February with those budget proposals. One further point I'd make, Chair, is the Secretary of State wrote to councils on the 24th of January in relation to the provisional settlement, which was announced on the 18th of December. So in advance of the final settlement, which is due in February, I was told today, the 6th of February. But what he said was that there'll be £600 million more available to local government as compared to the provisional settlement, of which 500 million, so from the 600, 500 million is for social care, so not available to districts like ours. But there is some extra funding available to districts, is the promise. We don't know how much that will be at this stage because we haven't got to the final settlement, which we should have sometime next week. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. Members, before we start, as Councillor Orton pointed out, we've got a full agenda. So I would ask everybody to keep the questions succinct and to the paper. Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 6.1, I received the report for tonight's meeting on the 24th of January. The report summary says this report was presented to the executive on the 25th of January, which was after this report came out. My question is, was there anything in the executive meeting that happened after this report was issued that we should be reported upon as an addendum or any further information?
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. The future reference date was because I thought we'd be reading it tonight, which was after the 25th of January. From my memory, and I'm sure Emily or Councillor Hoyer can correct me, there weren't any additional recommendations arising or anything of note arising from the executive meeting on the 25th compared to what's in front of you tonight.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Gerson.
On page 6.5, I assume this is to Tim or Michael, I'm not sure who wants to answer this, but on page 6.5, 1.7, the fourth paragraph along says funding guaranteed of 580,000. And then in the next, in brackets says 0 in 23-24. Is this the new grant we're receiving? Because all the other, in the rest of the table, it shows them going up or down, but that particular one, it just says 0 in 23-24. So is this a new grant or guaranteed funding?
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. It's not new. It was new for 23-24, and it continued in 24-25 for next year. It's just that it was 0 for Rochford in 23-24. The nature of the funding guarantee, although it wasn't apparent when it was introduced a year ago, increasingly looks like a balancing figure of government funding. So because for 23-24, Rochford had a large new homes bonus, that would have influenced the amount of funding guarantee it received. And so it had none, whereas new homes bonus is lower for 24-25. So there is a funding guarantee, and it acts as the balancing figure when the government work out how much additions they want to increase core spending power by for local government, which is why, for example, this extra money that the Secretary of State has announced, if we are going to receive any of that money, it will come in the form of additional funding guarantee. It does slightly contradict the government's policy of arguing that new homes bonus is there to incentivise new homes building. If you increase your new homes bonus, but then you lose funding guarantee and vice versa. But that appears to be what it's for, but that's why it was 0 for 23-24.
Councillor Gerson, did you want to come back on that?
I've got a second part to my question. The following paragraph says that the district will receive a homeless prevention grant, which we're awaiting confirmation. Then on page 6.13, it says there's a grant of 287,000. Is that the same grant? Is it just appear in a different column and not there? You know, was it awaiting on that page but not?
No, that is our best estimate of what it's going to be, which was based on a figure for next year based on this year. But we have yet to be formally notified as to what that figure is for next year.
Right, thanks, Tim. So that's just an estimate in that column. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's just coming back to the item just previously mentioned, item 1.7 on 6.5. I do notice that, in fact, the council have done a lot better this year in the amount that we're receiving, which is 1.1 million as opposed to 990,000 from last year. So that's very good to say that the national government is actually providing councils a little bit more. But there was something I'd just like to clarify, where you were mentioning about the use of earmarked reserves to assist in the balance of this budget. Will you be looking to reinstate those earmarked reserves at any time? And what are the plans for actually reinstating those earmarked reserves?
Thank you, Chair. At this stage, over the 5 years, there aren't plans to reinstate reserves that are used. There are plans to try and mitigate against using all those reserves up over the 5-year period. I would suggest that we're going through a period of such uncertainty and such pressure brought about not because overall government funding as we define it is going down, because it hasn't gone down, it's gone up a little bit compared to 23-24, but because of all the cost pressures and expectations of local government, which have added substantially to the typical budget gaps that are opening each year, which I think I've described when I've done briefings, including to your group. So there aren't plans in the MTFS to reinstate or to replenish or to increase reserves, merely to try and find ways to avoid using them all up.
Would you like to come back, Councillor Ward?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I just want a bit more clarity on the earmarked reserves. Are there some of reserves that are less important than others, and some which are not necessary at all?
Thank you, Chair. There are different types of reserves, and it's difficult to compare one against the other and say prioritise them in order of importance. For example, we have yesterday just been finalising our estimates of business rates for next year. It's necessarily really late. In fact, Brentwood's was finished a day late today, and Carrie Cox from Rochford went over and helped Brentwood complete theirs today. So there are very last minute things that are happening. And because, especially on business rates, it fluctuates because of things like, not so much reliefs, but because we get grant on those, but appeals that can have a big impact on our level of business rates income. We have no control over that. And so for something like that, we have an equalisation reserve, we call it, which is there to try and smooth out these ups and downs that we might have. Now, I would consider that to be really important from my financial point of view. But then there are other reserves that are there that are earmarked for investment in the district, specifically the investment reserve and what was the hard soft infrastructure reserve, which it could be argued are really vital to funding the capital programme and investment in assets of the council going forward. So trying to prioritise is not something I'd want to try and do. I'd argue if anyone were to prioritise them, it would be members on the advice of officers.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Ward? Thank you. Councillor Wotton, next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a number of questions, and I don't know quite whether you'd like me to take them page by page. There's not that many, but if I do page 6.7 first, yeah. First of all, if I go to the third bullet point under 1.12, there is an ongoing revenue contribution to capital of £255,000. Presumably that is topping up reserves in some way, but that's one question. If I go through, if there could be some explanation of the use of the newly established budget equalisation reserve, because that would help understanding. That's the last bullet point under 1.12. Under 6.3, the final bullet point there, to deliver the objectives of the council's asset strategy. Now, I'm not clear, bearing in mind this is a budget paper, as to what the current objectives of the council's asset strategy is. And finally, on that page, 6.5, it talks about aim to increase fees and charges in general by at least inflation prevalent at the time the charges are set. But later in the report on page 6.13, 2.4, it refers to the fact that There is a separate report on this agenda, that sets out the proposed fees and charges for 2024-25. These are assumed to have been agreed for the purposes of this report. So that's the lot on. You'll be pleased to know, Madam Chair, that's the most extensive of the pages in the questions. But
Thank you, Councillor Wotton. Tim, would you like to take those or go through those? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will, but I'll need to stop and ask the third question because I didn't quite pick that one up. The first question about the 255,000 revenue contribution to capital, that is used within the capital programme each year. It's always been there. It's been there for years. It's been 255,000 for many years. So effectively, there's a revenue budget. We assume we spend it all because we just put it all in to fund the capital programme or contribute towards funding the capital programme. And we are using all of that completely over the 5 years of the MTFS. The budget equalisation reserve, what we've done with that is we've established it this year. We're establishing it this year as a reserve. There is some underspend in this year, which we're using to contribute towards this reserve. And then we start drawing upon it in future years. So the idea is to smooth out any fluctuations in budget gaps over the 24/5, 25/6, 26/7. If we hadn't done that, I think it's page 6.9, the 5-year summary, you can see budget equalisation reserve in there. And there's the 193,000 contribution to the budget equalisation reserve, and then use of in future years beyond that. So it's an attempt to show the headline of balanced budget 000, no budget gap within the existing resources of the MTFS period. I didn't catch your third question, sorry.
third question was under 6.3, the last bullet point. Bearing in mind this is a budget, so objective facts, to deliver the objectives of the council's asset strategy. So we're talking about a budget here.
Thank you, Chair. The budget is a financial plan at a moment in time. It's not dealing in facts. Final accounts deal with facts, not budget. It's projections. In 5 years' time, you'd have to have a crystal ball to know what local government finance is going to look like. So I wouldn't ever contend that this is a paper full of facts. I'd like to think there aren't any errors in it. And in relation to things like references to objectives, this is always a tricky one to try and have balanced out. When you have a financial plan and you're projecting forward 5 years, you would ideally want to look at a set of objectives and strategies that are non-financial to inform that financial plan. But things are never that even. And we are in a stage, for example, as regards the asset strategy, where that's still in development, as are many other strategies and policies that don't necessarily coincide with the statutorily enforced timetable of a budget process. You referred also to fees and charges. The reference to elsewhere on the agenda, this is a report to overview and scrutiny and shouldn't have been there because that isn't on the agenda. It will be elsewhere on the agenda for full council when the budget comes. Did you also have a question about fees and charges themselves, or was that the main point?
Well, I referred to the fact that of the attachment, which clearly isn't attached, but also in relation to fees and charges in 7.5, page 6.9, quite clearly it is known what the expectation is because there's a figure quoted there of 0.325 million. That's on page 6.10. So presumably it's just the detail that sits behind that figure.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's the figure that is incorporated within the summary figures in the table on 6.9. The fees and charges are incorporated into those numbers, and so have been anticipated for 24/5. They built into that 24/5 budget, those 24/5 budget figures.
Nearly there, Madam Chair. On page 6.14, I find it quite interesting that there is a figure quoted there of £1.4 million allocation for the Rochford District Council office relocation, which is to be the key thing, which is assumed to be funded from the receipts of the sale of the existing offices. Now, I appreciate there may be competitive interest why we can't go into too much detail there, but I just, as an observation, I find that an interesting figure. So I'm not expecting a response out of deference to the 151 officer on that. Thank you also for referring to the table on 6.16. Another observation, I find it absolutely amazing that we are anticipating using earmarked reserves. These aren't earmarked reserves to fund services. They are earmarked reserves taking us down to a frighteningly low level over the term, and also the unallocated funds. Whilst I agree with the principle of 10%, we really are scraping the cupboard to fund our issues. Now, clearly the opportunity comes on the 20th of February, and I'm proposing an amendment because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding at Council. I am proposing an amendment to add on to the existing recommendation on page 6.1, a very fair point made in the second bullet point of 2.2, and the amendment is to add to that existing recommendation, mindful it is not a line-by-line scrutiny of the budget contents, because I think that's a very fair point, and we've endeavoured to not go line by line tonight, but I think that would be an appropriate thing, so there's no misunderstanding at the Council that it's assumed that we've gone through line by line. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Wotton, I'm going to ask you to actually point out exactly when the document and read that out again for the officer, and then I will ask if there's a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation currently reads, Overview and Scrutiny Committee is requested to make comment and consider any recommendations to the Executive in respect of the attached report. And I'm asking for the words mindful, and then the final words in the second bullet point of 2.2, mindful it is not a line-by-line scrutiny of the budget contents.
Councillor Wotton, I'm just going to ask Emily just to help with this a little. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the way that the covering report is written for this item for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to give you the freedom, as usual, to make recommendations as you see fit and to make observations, which are then fed back to the Executive. So at this moment in time, you haven't got a proposed and seconded recommendation on the table to amend. So I think what you will probably get to, without predetermining your discussion, is a point where the committee moves to recommend that the Executive considers this budget report. At this point, Councillor Wotton, you would add your wording of mindful that this has not been a line-by-line review of the budget.
As always, I think that's really helpful advice from the monitoring officer, and I'm very content with that. There's obviously a lot of people that will be at full council that aren't sitting around this table, and I'm just keen that it's understood what our role has been in overview and scrutiny tonight to look at the report, and there's not, when we are perhaps looking at a few lines or ideas, there's not misunderstanding. And whilst complimenting the monitoring officer, I would just like to come back to the section 151 officer and say that I always have high admiration for the reports that he produces, and I think this is exemplary, and there's certainly no errors that I could find. So I'm full of praise for a very detailed report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wotton, and I'm presuming Councillor Ward, you want to second that?
Yeah, I would like to second, but I also need to ask a further question.
Go ahead.
Now, thank you very much. I would like to actually refer back to page 6.9 on the table. Now, I know we have got other items on the agenda that will reflect this, and this is strategic planning. The amount that has been set aside for that, I would personally suggest that is paltry in regards to what is going to be required in regards to the local plan coming forward. I think it's we already can from the reports we're going to be looking at that planning, the planning department, enforcement and all the areas have been starved of resources for many years. We have a local plan to get out, and I consider the amount that has been set aside for strategic planning is insufficient.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. So that's just your comment that you want fed back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members indicating? Councillor Mrs. Gadsden.
Page 6.8, 6.6, it talks about delivering savings and additional income, but there's no breakdown of what the expected savings and income would be. I was wondering if you could give us a steer on that.
That goes back to Tim, and I think that is also encompasses Councillor Wootton's comments.
Thank you, Chair. The reference there is to some of the bullet point ideas that could be pursued over the medium term in order to address the medium term budget gap. If this were to be an accurate prediction, then it's suggesting we're going to have expenditure exceeding income by £880,000 in 2027-28. So what this paragraph and the preceding one is attempting to do is to say these are the sort of things that the council should be considering doing over the medium term. Not to say the world is coming to an end, we've got to take action tomorrow and start slashing and burning through services now in order to address something that, let's face it, might never happen. There might not be a budget gap of 880,000 in 27-28. So it's deliberately words and not numbers, because it would be premature to start and perhaps even facile to start picking numbers out of the air that didn't have any justification or business case or project plan behind them, that happened to magically come to say the 880,000 in 27-28. What we've done is to keep to words to say these are the sort of policies and strategies that will need to be adopted over the coming years if this were to come to pass, the medium-term financial strategy projections were to come to pass. I would also say a couple of other things while I have the opportunity, is that having a budget gap in years 4 and 5 of the 5-year MTFS, that's actually very good. I had a meeting of all the other Section 151 officers around Essex this morning. Every one of them has large budget gaps appearing in years 3, 4, 5, sometimes year 2 as well, because there's so much uncertainty. Nobody can be sure about the predictions, so that there is going to be a tendency for gaps to appear in later years. And the other thing I'd say is, even if this came true and the worst happened, we would currently have enough reserves to cover it. Not that we would want to use reserves to cover ongoing budget gaps, but we would have enough to do so, which means that there isn't any concerns about not just approving a balanced budget by council, but approving a balanced medium-term financial strategy too. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I can see now Councillor Foster, and I think this will be the last person this evening. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm referring to page 6.21 under the Resources, Climate Change and Economy heading. The budget for 2023 was 884,000, which was an actual of 941,000. The climate emergency has been declared, and the budget would appear to have been reduced to 600,000. seems a bit odd, seems to be based upon increasing operating income from 275,000 to 650,000. So perhaps wouldn't expect an answer on that tonight, but when it comes to a budget discussion, we need to understand how that income's increased from 275,000 to 650,000.
Thank you, councillor Foster. I think Tim or councillor Hoy might like to pick up on that one.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure of the figure you're talking about. I know the Climate Emergency Committee met last night, and it may be that some of those decisions have been fed in already into the budget. I'm happy to get back to all members on this tomorrow, if that's possible, to give those figures. So you have, I know it doesn't help with you, what you recommend tonight, but I can get you the information for tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, I've just got a couple of points here. Again, it's disappointing that we only had 329 responses to our budget survey, bearing in mind we've got a population of 87,000. So that's something for the executive to note and perhaps take forward for future consultations and surveys. Our residents, they don't look at percentages, to be honest. They look at the bottom figure and how much this is going to cost them. It has there on page 6.3 under C, an amount of £7.55. Some people may seem small, to others, when it all adds up, may seem a lot. However, what they will all ask is, what am I getting in return for this increase? Now, I've read through here. I can see of the capital spend, quite a lot is invested in certain areas, including the building that we are sitting in. And yet I'm still to see a meaningful market research come back to overview and scrutiny. And I don't begrudge the investment, if I'm honest. But what I would like to see, and I will not be able to vote on a paper without that information. As Councillor Wootton, I have to agree, we need some more information in this paper. I'd like to see the breakdown of the upper capital projects, because we're district councillors. We're not town councillors, or some of us may be, and some of us may be parish councillors, but we're here to represent the district. And I would like to see how those other capital projects are impacting on our parishes, our villages, because there seems a huge investment into one area, which at the moment doesn't sit that comfortably with me. Thank you. Okay, members, we have an additional recommendation put forward by Councillor Wootton, and I am going to read that out. And Councillor Wootton, I am sure, will correct me if I'm wrong. And I've got to move it closer, sorry. That the 2024 budget and 2024 to 29 medium-term financial strategy report to be recommended to the executive, mindful that there has not been a line-by-line scrutiny of the budget by this committee. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Who's counting? All those against, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 2, 3. So that recommendation is carried 7 for, 3 against and 3 abstained. And the comment going back to the executive is we would like to see a breakdown of the other capital projects line. We will now, members, unless I get a nudge from Emily, take the other recommendations. Are you happy that we take them on block, members?
You don't need to vote on those.
Oh.
They're the recommendations for the executive.
Forgive me, members, we do not need to vote on those. They are the recommendations for the executive. My error. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chairman, if it's okay, I'd like to leave now. If possible, and have a sleep tonight for a change.
Of course. I
Thank you.
think Tim has to stay, I'm afraid. Have a pleasant evening. Members, now we have in front of us agenda item 7, which is the capital and treasury management strategy. So Tim's got a busy night with us and Tim will go through this report for us.
Thank you, Chair. A brief introduction. This report sets out the capital and treasury management strategy for 2024-25. It works in tandem with the budget and medium-term financial strategy. There is not a great deal of material in relation to borrowing, as the Council has no external debt. Regarding investments, the parameters and criteria for investments are set out in the report. And this report, subject to any views of this committee, will be proposed to full Council on the 20th of February. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Members, have you any questions for Tim on the midterm financial strategy? Is Councillor Mrs. Gatton, are you okay?
I was going to ask the question, but I think Tim's been round this block too many times with this question, so I'll take it outside.
You may ask the question if you would like to. There we are.
Page 6 hold on, make sure I'm on the right side. Sorry, 7.9, sorry. There's an operational boundary limit figure of 777, and further along, this amount's been increased to 977, I believe. And when I looked up what this meant, it means that it's either debt or likely expenditure. And I've been trying to find out for a few years now. We don't have any debt, so it's not debt. Likely expenditure is laid out. So where is this figure? What is it about?
I'm sure Tim will like to tell us again.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question that I've been asked a number of times, and it might be because I've never been able to answer it, which is why it keeps being asked. The figure is a historic one. It's been in the accounts for very many years. And I've been assured it's not external debt. Yet for treasury management purposes, there's a very prescribed approach to the way you present your treasury management strategy and the key indicators. And as Councillor Gadsden's pointed out, there's the operational boundary limit and there's the authorised boundary limit. And on 7.15, there's a description of the operational boundary limit, which is the limit beyond which external debt is not normally expected to be exceeded. And the authorised boundary limit is the maximum amount of external debt permitted by the Council. Now, on the face of it, those two descriptions are not that dissimilar. But what it means is, on the normal operational basis, you wouldn't exceed your operational boundary limit, which for most councils will be millions, if not hundreds of millions. But then you would add on a bit for the authorised boundary limit. You'd add in an amount which gave you headroom so that you're absolutely sure you weren't going to go above that figure, and you have to come up with a figure. So the 977,000 for the authorised boundary limit compared to the 777,000 for the operational boundary limit, the difference of 200,000 is just headroom that doesn't represent, there's no science behind the extra 200,000. As regards what the 777,000 is, well, it's not external debt. It might be the product of historic technical accounting adjustment. It might be internal borrowing, when at some point in the past, the council decided to incur some capital expenditure. They didn't want to borrow externally, so they borrowed internally. And what that means is they used their cash reserves that they had available to fund a capital project. And they accounted for it in a slightly peculiar way rather than just saying it's a revenue contribution to capital. I'm attempting to commission the Treasurer Advisors link for the council to explore this. I've had a number of attempts and I've got a meeting next week with them. It is a bit open-ended and I'm not offering any guarantees because they said they're going to charge a daily rate because they don't know how long it will take. And if it costs thousands, then I'll take a view that it will be one of life's mysteries that we won't be able to identify what it is.
Thank you, Tim. And perhaps if you could give Councillor Mrs Gadstone the date and the time of your meeting, she can give you a call afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, I just want you to add to that. It is, my concern about that is it's almost like this has been a copy and paste exercise for many years with that figure, and we've never actually got to understand what it's about. So we're carrying this year on, and we really do need to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I think we all agree, and I think Tim is definitely on the case for that one. Yes, you may.
Very briefly, Chair. The meeting's on the 6th of February. So after that, please. And it is the same figure year after year if it's on the balance sheet, because the opening balance for the next year is the closing balance from the previous year. So the reason why it's 777,000 in 24/5 is because it was 777,000 in 23/4. It never moves. Nothing ever changes about it, which is why it's the same every year. Unless we take action to do something with it, it will remain there forever on the balance sheet and appear in the Treasury Management Strategy.
Thank you. Unless there's any other questions, we will go to the recommendation 8.1. It's proposed that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolves to recommend the contents of this Treasury Management Q3 report to full council. All those in favour, please raise your hand. No. I propose that from the chair. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ward. All those in favour? It's unanimous.
So you have skipped ahead of report, so that is the next item. We just need to go back one.
Members, if nobody noticed, I actually read out the wrong recommendation there, so I do apologise. That's my effort at trying to get through this agenda tonight, and I will apologise and slow down. The recommendation is to recommend approval of the Capital and Treasury Management Strategy 2024 to full council on the 20th of February. I propose that from the chair. I have a seconder with Councillor Ward. All those in favour? Unanimous. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Now we have agenda item 8. Just going to pause one moment there. I'm going to pause while, thank you very much, Councillor Newport. So Councillor Mrs Mason can rejoin us. Welcome back, Councillor Mrs Mason. Agenda item 8, Treasury Management Q3 Review 2023 to 24. Again, Tim Willis, our Director for Finance, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the Treasury Management position of the Council for the current year as at the end of December. The main highlight is the excess income generated from investments. This windfall has been factored into the latest budget monitoring report going to the executive next week. It has enabled the creation of a budget mitigation reserve, which is proposed to be used to eliminate any budget gaps in the medium-term financial strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Are there any questions for our Director of Finance? Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On table
Page 87.
8.7, I thought a gremlin had got into the system with the name Sonia there, being a very well-respected former member of our staff. But I realise now from a previous report that it stands for Sterling Overnight Index Average. So I won't ask that question. I just thought a gremlin had got in. It's a plea, and I do understand it's a controversial plea, but where there are graphs, and this isn't the only one, it would be nice if, and I realise it possibly causes extra work, these graphs mean very little when they're in black and white. You know, I do remember the famous quote about snooker, you know, the black ball behind the blue or whatever, you know, so it's not helpful to have this pictorial stuff when it's like that. But I did smile about Sonia. The other observation, not a question, is that on 1.3, page 8.1, whilst we acknowledge that high interest rates are a burden for many, there is the fortuitous amounts that it benefits for savers. In this case, we are a saver and the majority of the funds there. And what a pleasant sum that is to have a windfall some of that time. But there isn't a question now about Sonia, so you'll be pleased to know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wotton. Can I just remind members, obviously we can bring our papers along in digital format. Our officer did email out that if you would like paper copies, if you do want coloured copies, perhaps also let her know at the time. Okay, we are trying to reduce our carbon footprint, so just bear that in mind. But I do appreciate that for some people paper copies are much easier to read. Any other questions, members? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Not so much a question as an observation. I think all of us know what GDP, CPI, etc. are, but I'm assuming that all of us do, and I think it's the wrong assumption. And I know there are explanations of some of the abbreviations in here, but I wonder if when we have reports that use abbreviations, that the first time that they're used, there could be what that abbreviation stands for. And it's not just this report. I think that would help with all reports, because more senior members will be familiar with the terminology, but for newer members who are trying to grasp the complexities, and it is a complex situation, I think if across the council we could make that some sort of recommendation, it would be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. That will be noted, please. I agree, especially as members of the public also read these papers, so if we can avoid acronyms, that's great. Any other members indicating no? Then we have Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question about S106 money. Rochford District Council is holding over £1 million for.
Could you please refer to the page that's referring
It's not
to?
mentioned on here, which is why I'm asking the question. Investment income, does the interest on the money we hold for the NHS, does it sit in our income or does it separately go to the NHS balance?
Chair, I'm not sure which income you're referring to in respect to what schemes and why it's the NHS, but in general what I can say is that some Section 106 money is provided in the form of community sums which we do invest, and the interest we earn on that we use to maintain and manage the sites that the Section 106 money was granted for, so it's all ring-fenced within the Section 106 development and the scheme attached to the Section 106. I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but any reserves that we hold, any cash reserves we hold, even if they're on behalf of somebody else or we're holding them until we have to return them, we earn interest on that money, as we did for example, there was a lot of business rate relief money that the government gave local authorities, including Rochford during COVID. and they guessed what the amount would be, and then they clawed it all back appropriately afterwards. We earn interest on that money whilst we held it. So as a general principle, anything we hold, even on behalf of others, unless there's a specific agreement, we would earn interest on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So members, we have the recommendation in front of you on page 8.1. It is proposed that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolves to recommend the contents of this Treasury Management Q3 report to full council. I propose that from the chair. Have I got a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. That is unanimous, members. Thank you. Moving on, members, to item 9. Agenda item 9 is the report on the progress of work to deliver improvements to the delivery of the Development Management and Enforcement Service. I'd like to invite Lee Nielsen to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So we've got two interrelated reports on the agenda in front of you this evening. Item 9, the report we're looking at right now, provides an overview of the service review that was carried out spring last year in relation to the planning service, specifically the development management teams of both authorities. That service review then led into a delivery program, essentially 14 recommendations. The recommendations are included in the report, and it sets out the phases for the various topic areas. Pleased to report that good progress has been made across the program. We've just stepped into phase 2 of the program. There is an overlap between the two reports that are presented this evening in relation to enforcement. So there is more detail in terms of the enforcement aspects of the service review in the second report, but hopefully the report's of interest and of assistance, but happy to take any questions or comment.
Thank you. So we're going to take questions first of all on agenda item 9. Members, have you got any questions? Councillor Ward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Well, having looked at Appendix 1, we have got a problem. Right the way through where we were discussing on the budget, I think the allocation of funds is insufficient, and I've already made a recommendation that that needs to be addressed. We have the local plan, we have various other things. We are unable to recruit, as is shown in the report. I think this is a problem, is resources that are not being funded in any way, shape or form appropriately. And I think this is a big problem that we're looking at. I think actually the recommendations are a real slap for us to take into consideration. And we need to seriously look at the funding within this particular division, because it is totally inappropriate. I'm looking at one of the things that jumped out at me as a question, if I may continue, Chairman, who are the Planning Improvement Board, and how does the membership, what is it comprised of? Is it members? Is it officers? Can I, have an insight, please?
If we can let the officer answer that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of, take the first comment first, in terms of finances, is highlighted as one of the risks. So for, paragraph 3.1 on page 9.4, I think it is on the agenda. I'm not sure if it's the same numbers on the pack that you have. But it highlights that finance is absolutely important. Finance and resources is absolutely critical to any planning service. And the report highlights the need to ensure that the service is resourced appropriately. There's reference to planning fees, the national fee increases at the back end of last year in December, and it's really important that that fee increase is reinvested into the service. So I absolutely agree with that point. In terms of the Planning Improvement Board, so the Planning Improvement Board is an officer group which reports to the relevant strategic director, and it essentially sits every 4 weeks, and it is ensuring that there is delivery on all of those recommendations. So essentially, is a check and challenge to make sure that that's happening. That board then produces a highlight report, which is then presented up into CLT, and again to ensure that there is that track of progress and RAG status, etc. So if anything was to start to wobble, whether it be through lack of finances or resource or whatever it might be, that would be highlighted. We'd be able to keep in front of that.
Thank you, Lee. If we can keep it to questions, that
Yeah.
would be great. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. It's almost a proposal here. I would like, if I may speak on this one, that there is a regular report that actually comes to overview and scrutiny in regards to this improvement board, so we can actually monitor what is actually being improved, because it's all very well having a board that's sitting there if no one knows what it's doing. So I would like that to come forward as a proposal from here. Thank you.
Would you therefore like to propose that and frame your wording, and possibly somebody may second that?
On the fly, okay. I propose that, let me get it right, that the Planning and Improvement Board reports its findings to overview and scrutiny, whatever, on a regular basis.
Do you have a seconder there?
Need a time limit.
Yeah.
Quarterly. Quarterly.
Councillor Foster has seconded that recommendation. So members, just so you're aware, this isn't so much recommendation for the report. This is a recommendation that this planning committee comes back to us on a quarterly basis, just with a report on their progress. Okay. So all those in favour of this recommendation? That's unanimous. Yeah. Councillor Mrs. Page. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Mrs. Gadsden, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, on resources, page 9.2, 2.3, for the director for Lee. Where are we with the filling of the senior planning post? Because you've got a part-timer, but that's obviously under-resourced. Have we made any progress?
Thank you, Chair. It is disappointing that despite adverts being placed in the professional journals, that we haven't been able to recruit into that post. It is picked up in part in the next report, but temporary resource is going into that post to be able to fill that. We've had almost like 0.3 of a FTE that's been filling that, but it needs to be the 100% FTE. So there is temporary resource going in for several months, and then we'll need to go back out to the market to try to fill that. It's notoriously difficult to find planning professionals, but it's not sustainable in a long period of time for the team to absolve the additional pressure. So they need to make sure that we recruit into that.
Thank you, Lee. Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't so much a question as a request. We have in Appendix 1 a table that gives us dates from September to December, from January to March, etc. In the narrative of the report, there's an explanation of what has happened in that table. It would be helpful if we're having a table, for the table to be updated so that we don't have to cross-reference all the time. So, for example, phase 1, you've got the rationale, that's fine, but the outcome should be also on that table, or it should say complete or something, rather than us having to scrabble around and look for it. So that's just a request that the presentation is perhaps altered in future so that it's easier for us to read. The other thing, I think all members are concerned about the number of enforcement cases that the council has and the difficulty we have in clearing the backlog, has any of this work had a direct result on the number of cases outstanding?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of that, the first point around the presentation table, just listening to the debate just there around the future reports. So absolutely, we'll make sure that that's included within that. In terms of so it's again referenced in the report, but systems, processes, and resources and structures are all interwound within this program. The structures and the resilience and capacity that's built within those structures is obviously key to that. So that is part of this phase that we're working through. You'll be aware of the Tier 4 appointments that happened just before Christmas. That had to happen in terms of sequence before we could then move into the structures. So that is part of that work.
Madam Chair, can I just come back on that? Would it be possible to put the number of cases outstanding on enforcement on the reports in future? Because I know that's quite a contentious issue and it's often asked and then it seems to get lost. So I wonder if that's information that we could just have flagged up on a regular basis if we're having a quarterly report. Would that be acceptable to the officers?
Yes, the officers just acknowledge
you.
that, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? So if we just have a look, all this report is for us to note. So is that noted, members? Thank you. And Lee, you are going to introduce agenda item 10, planning enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report specifically refers to enforcement activity in the last 3 quarters 2023, which sets out more of a in-depth analysis of some of the cases. So the cases that have been presented to the authority, which have been closed, which have been resolved through negotiation, or where cases where there's been no breach identified. So it's just to try to give a flavour, more of a statistical report, more of a flavour for members on what the pressures are within the team. And again, because of that read across between what we've just been talking about in terms of structures, I think it just really does highlight the importance of ensuring that the team are resourced and we have that capacity within the team, specifically within the enforcement team.
Thank you, Lee. Councillor Ward, please keep to questions rather than statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to make an assumption. I assume that with the reporting back, this will be included in the reporting on ongoing. I think Councillor Mason, Mrs. Mason has asked for that. So that's one item. The other is there have been a lot of historic cases, and I can see that you had a clear up within the report. Now, obviously, I know from experience that some of those cases, because of the fact of lack of staff, became out of time. And I do know of several that became out of time and therefore unenforceable because they were out of time. And I find that extremely disappointing when that occurs. Now, is there a way in which where there are items, where there are conditions on quite a lot of major developments, that these major developments, they are flagged up, that there is a time limit on them and that they are inspected? That's a concern I do have. If we go to the appendix, you've got it here, enforcement cases awaiting appeal outcomes or compliance. Now, do you know if any of these have complied in any way, or are you waiting to find out if they have been complied with?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I don't have the knowledge of the individual cases themselves, so I wouldn't be able to say that. But in terms of the appendices that have been put together, this is setting out indicatively what the cases that are waiting appeal or that compliance. So it may well be that enforcement notices have been served and the time period has been set for compliance, and it's under a period of monitoring, and then obviously it would then need to we then may need to escalate in terms of the actions that may mean prosecution if it wasn't complied with in sense of the steps in the enforcement notice.
If I may help, 10.8, last item, 77 Barrymore Walk. Okay, just to help you, that particular site is now tidy. So just confirming that that site is now that site is tidy. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for Lee? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is going to be possible or even desirable, but I wonder if the officer and the committee would want to consider whether there should be some member involvement in the enforcement decisions. I know they're of a technical nature. However, we pass the planning application at development committee. Members and officers then put conditions on. Those conditions are then hopefully complied with or altered again. They would normally come back for alteration to development committee. Yet when they're not complied with, development committee members are not necessarily aware of that. Therefore, they're not aware of the effect of the conditions that they're putting on and whether or not they're reasonable. I think it might be helpful if there was some sort of member involvement. And I've got no idea how and no idea if it would fit in with the process or where, but I would like it to be considered if possible. Thank you.
Lee, if you'd like to come back on that, I think it's quite a reasonable suggestion.
Thank you, Chair. It is. I'm just trying to work out how what that would fit into the process, and it may be something that we might just have to take away and give some consideration to. It's a legal question as well.
Yes, I wasn't expecting an answer tonight. I think it's a complex request, but I think it might help in the long run with better initial decisions. If members are aware of why conditions aren't carried out and why the enforcement is then effectively waived in some cases, then perhaps they would reconsider putting those conditions on in the first place or make them stronger. I don't know, but it's just a thought. Thank you.
Any other members? Councillor Foster, I think you'll be the last member on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On page 10.2, the table shows 28% of cases resolved through negotiation. And at the bottom it explains that could be alterations or retrospective planning. Do you have a sense of how many of those were actually achieved through retrospective planning? And when the person involved is encouraged to make a retrospective, is it in the reasonable understanding that it will be approved?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the breakdown and the sense of how that percentage breaks down, but in terms of the typical approach to an enforcement case would be when a breach has been identified, the first port of call would be to look for a remedy to that. And if it is a development that is potentially compliant with the development plan and potentially something that could be approved, then clearly the first step would be to invite a planning application. If it's something that is so fundamentally contrary to a development plan, then you'd naturally move to enforcement action fairly swiftly. But where there is a potential for it to be acceptable, then that's when the invitation would typically be offered.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Foster?
If I may just come back briefly, these retrospectives, would we expect them to go to the development committee or will be decided by officers?
Thank you, Chair. I guess it would depend on the scale and nature of the development that's taking place. If it's something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to go to a development committee, planning committee, then it would typically be an item that would be delegated in that sense to that decision. But clearly, if it was a significant breach, environmental breach, something of significant scale, then perhaps that would warrant a high level of decision making.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, just on there, it might be useful for ward members to know about some of those changes, because often we're the first on the ground to hear X has put in for this and now they're building this, what's going on. So it could be quite helpful.
Chair, if I may, there's reference in the early report around reporting arrangements. That's a perfect example of that.
Super. Thank you. I don't think there's any other questions. So again, members, this report is just for noting. Is that noted, members? Thank you. Lee, welcome to Rochester District Council, and you're more than welcome to leave. Right, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 11, members. It is the One Team Transformation Programme strategic partner with Brentwood Borough Council Q3 update. Greg Campbell, our director, will introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of updates following some questions I've received before the committee this evening, and I'll go through those questions, then obviously open up to any questions that you may have. Question one was around the status of staff members and shared designation across both councils. What I can confirm is that those staff who have been through the service review process, who have not been through the service review process, remain with their designated council and are not working across both councils. Further, what I can confirm is that where the service review has taken place and there is a one team in place and the staff have been put into position, those structures should now be on the members portal and that should have been communicated to you. If it hasn't, I will check tomorrow and make sure that that is communicated to you. And every time that happens, we'll update that portal with the new structure. The second question refers to, again, managing staff and the allocation of time spent across both authorities. What I can say about this is that those services that have been through the review process have done so under the governance arrangements that are in place and therefore been through both leaders of the two organisations. Those that are presented to those leaders and been agreed have made sure that it's a 50-50 split between the two authorities and that matches the resources and the work that is identified. The next couple of questions are more HR related, so I've taken advice from them. Hopefully I'll do them justice. I've been asked, is there additional cost to having interim staff as opposed to staff in post? The response there is more than likely interim staff cost slightly more due to the fees, for example. However, there are exceptions where actually staff that are actually employed by the council are slightly more expensive because we have the on costs that are there as well. The next question around this was, how do staff retention levels lie at the moment compared with other local authorities? The updated figure that I've got up to the 31st of January 2024 is currently our turnover at Rochford is 10%. The closest we can compare that to at the moment is the LGA, who provide these figures, and their last figure was in 2021, and their turnover figure was 14% at the moment. And then the last question was around exit interview questions and around whether there were any common themes. Out of the 14 resignations, only one exit questionnaire was returned. This covered a number of reasons for leaving, and further to this, what we know about the 14 resignations is that we know four of the officers left for work in the private sector and 2 left for another local authority. There were no common themes identified. And lastly, just to update members, at previous meetings, it's been asked about a consultation with residents. We undertook that questionnaire consultation just before Christmas. It closed yesterday. I've got some initial feedback from that consultation. We asked residents whether they are aware of the partnership that was taking place and whether they were in support of the partnership. And what we did also allow them to do is to write some comments, if they had any, about the partnership in place. In responses, we had 78 responses. Those that were aware, 45 said they were aware, 33 said they weren't, 25 said they were in support of the partnership, 53 said they were not, And I haven't got, obviously, I haven't got all the responses because that would take a little bit more time to go through them and whether there were any common themes. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Members, Councillor Wharton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was really pleasing to hear the Section 151 officer refer to the fact of the budget gap in Rochford early on, and it is to the initiatives of the one team to no borrowing, no interest payments, no capital repayments, and it's a delight to hear those sorts of themes are continuing because I believe passionately that the survival of local government generally is through creative schemes. So I'm refreshed to know that there is continuing support. However, if we are going to use 14% as a benchmark and say that's fine, I don't agree with that. I think 10% is too high. I think anything in excess of 5% from the official personnel management bodies would be a little bit of a concern in an organisation. So I'm afraid I'm not reassured with the 14% figure and us being 10%, very dated figure. Totally supportive of the One Team programme, but we know the difficulty in recruiting in the public sector. We know the fact that any programme like this, and this was always a risk, leads to uncertainty that can lead to difficulties with morale. And it's been going on now for 2 years. And I think it's time it came to an end. And when you look at the list here, there are a number of issues where there is slippage and it's overdue. And I understand that goes on in the best of projects, but my appeal is, can it get sorted out pretty quickly? Because it is leading, and the practicality is we all talk to staff in conjunction, and there are issues with morale, and I would suggest it is uncertainty because there are opportunities outside our authority, and if people are thinking I've got to wait another 6 months before I know what I'm going to do, and I've got a choice to go to another role which may be a higher paid role, it will happen. So it's a plea to get this sorted out. Please accept the fact that I don't have the sort of influence that I did have at the start of this programme, but I'm sure people would want to speed it up, get it done, because on paper it looks good, but the practicalities, the implications, it's a plea, it's not a question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton. Just a reminder, recommendations here are that the committee notes the progress of the One Team Transformation Programme. For recommendation 2, the committee makes any recommendations to the executive for consideration. Did you want to make a recommendation?
I think the recommendation is that the programme board examine the programme and look for ways in which it can be speeded up. I'm not wording it particularly well, but the monitoring officer is always absolutely excellent at converting words off the top of my head to local government speak, but certainly speed it up in a way that reduces and minimises uncertainty within the staff, and actually settles the authority, because we want stability within the authority in terms of progressing the delivery of services. But I'm sure there's work going on to try and turn that into a decent recommendation. Thank you.
While we allow Emily some time, Tim, did you want to come back on anything else that Councillor Wharton raised at all?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Chair. I probably should make myself clear. The 14% is the LGA's median across the whole country of turnover. So it wasn't their target, as it were. And totally agree, you know, we want to drive that down as much as possible. The other point being about, we want to get some of that slippage back. We are looking at plans on how we're approaching that and amending what we are doing to make sure we can bring those to fruition as quickly as possible, and take on the point that we're always communicating with staff. We really do try hard and we keep working at that to make sure they're kept informed of what is going on. But as you point out, we are going through transformation. There is always going to be some nervousness. And what we do is try and communicate the process, the timings, everything, so they are fully informed all the time. But thank you for the comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think Emily will have worded your words quite succinctly, so I'll pass over to Emily to read those out if you're in agreement with those.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation that I've captured is that the one team programme be drawn to a close in line with the original timescale of 2 years to minimise any further uncertainty for staff.
In order to stabilise the business.
So I'll add, and in order to stabilise the business.
You know, I feel as if I could have written that myself. Thank you.
Would you like to second that, Councillor Ward? If I come back to you then on your question, because Councillor Lambourne was next, if that's okay. So, okay, so we're going to take a vote on that recommendation. Members, shall I me to read it out again? Recommendation is that the one team programme be drawn to a close in line with the original timescale of 2 years to minimise any further uncertainty for staff and in order to stabilise the business. All those in favour, please raise your hand.
Can I ask for some clarity before we take a vote, please, or if we're not able to debate it?
Yeah, what's your question, Councillor?
The original timescale, you put the original 2 years, but when did it start? When would it be completed by? I think we need to know that timescale. Thank you.
I'm sure Greg will correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially we're due. We're coming up to the end of that 2 year timescale. So formally, the council went into partnership in January 2022.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that renders that slightly academic, but nevertheless, thank you.
Do you want, Chair, just to, I suppose that the partnership started in January 2022. The service reviews didn't start till later that year. It was more around the September time, full service review started. Communications and HR started earlier, around May that year, but the full service reviews didn't start until around September 2022.
Could I recommend within this financial year? So that will give to the end of April.
If I can come back, I think that's a totally reasonable time frame. The point we're making is we want to clear up uncertainty amongst our workforce as quickly as possible. And if they've got and I totally take Councillor Mrs Mason's point, I think it's absolutely right to put a time constraint on it. So that seems to be reasonable, bearing in mind the 25th of January 2024 has passed. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can come back, I take Councillor Wootton's point, but we've just heard that the staff alterations didn't start till September. So if we're doing 2 years, that would be September, which I think would be reasonable. I think quality is better than rushing, personally, but yeah, it's just a point of view. If you originally wanted 2 years, 2 years from September is September.
We have Councillor Wootton's proposal on the recommendation on the table. It is that the one team programme be drawn to a close by the end of this financial year to minimise any further uncertainty for staff and in order to stabilise the business. So all those in favour, that is your recommendation that you've got there.
Can I move an amendment? That's what I was asking Councillor Wootton if he would consider amending it, because he didn't originally put the date in.
Yeah.
I would like to support
members,
it, but
members, I'm going to
let
Emily speak first, our monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably just worth clarifying the one team transformation programme timescales, because whilst my colleague has talked about the first service reviews being completed in September. It did begin, the process began before that. And so we have been working to, when we phased the programme, we've been working to the programme being concluded at the end of this financial year. So the recommendation as it stands now does reflect the original timescales of the programme. I think it's important that members recognise that this recommendation would mean, and of course this is being recommended to the executive, but this recommendation would mean that not necessarily all teams will have been able to complete a one-team service review at that point. But the programme does need to reach an end, and actually we need to move as an authority into a programme of continuous service improvement and continuous transformation. So there may continue to be changes in teams, but it won't necessarily be under the badge of the one team programme, because that will have drawn to a close.
Thank you. And then, unless I'm wrong, we are only making this recommendation to the executive. So I will read it out one more time. The recommendation is that the one team programme be drawn to a close by the end of this financial year to minimise any further uncertainty for staff and in order to stabilise the business. All those in favour? All those against, please? None. Those abstaining? Those that didn't vote? Councillor Lambourne, you had a question next on my list.
Yes, I'd like to thank Greg for answering some of my questions that I put to him previously, and he answered them just now. But I still have two basic problems. The first is I cannot understand why, as being this council, RDC, being the junior partner in this partnership, why we're having a 50-50 split on the costs for the senior management team. I've worked many years through my life in consultancies, banks, insurance companies, and where you work on multiple projects, you have project codes, and you book your time against the work that you do. Why we haven't got a system like that so that we can accurately allocate the time?
Councillor Lambourne, would you like to let Greg answer that first question, and then
Well, I haven't finished it, but yeah, okay.
Rather than, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lambourne. I wouldn't say Rochford are a junior partner at all in this relationship. It's a 50-50 partnership as I see it. And the management structure that we have is a 50-50 split about the work that we take on across both organisations. And I think that filters down in the service reviews that we do. If it isn't, then the service review that would come forward, obviously there's a time frame on that now, would show a different split, which should also be reflective in the financial implications of that service review.
Thank you, Greg. So the reason I sort of interjected, Councillor Lambourne, is because it is a 50-50 split.
We don't know though, do we? So we've got no empirical evidence that there is a 50-50 split. But anyway, okay. My second point.
Greg, would you mind just coming back on how that is monitored, if that's possible, please?
Apologies, Chair. I'm pulling rank and jumping in on this one. So the terms of the original Section 113 agreement between the two councils when entering into the partnership was that it was very much on a 50-50 basis. Both partners were equal and both partners would receive an equal share of the resource. Now, that agreement does also require that we undertake an annual review of that split of costs, because another key principle of the partnership is that neither council can subsidise the other one. So on an annual basis, that split of costs is reviewed to check that it still is accurate as a 50-50 split. And if, for example, there were some areas in the council where the service delivery model was different and therefore the cost apportionment should be higher in one than the other, we would make that adjustment. So the baseline is 50-50, but it is reviewed and it is kept under review.
And who monitors that review? Have we seen that? Shouldn't that become part of this report?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. It'll be through the Section 151 officer undertaking that review as well, that part of it, with the Head of Pay Service, Jonathan Stevenson.
So just for clarity, Councillor Lambourne, where we've asked for that to be included once the review's done in a future report.
Right, my second question is, on the staff retention, you say that Rochford's got 10%, the national average is 14. What is it for Brentwood?
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't asked that question at the start, so I haven't got that figure. Sorry, I was only asked for the retention rate for Rochford. Sorry, so I didn't have that to hand. Sorry.
That's fine, Greg. Perhaps if you could circulate it to members.
Apologies.
That would be a relevant benchmark against whether we're performing as well as the other half of our partnership. Without that, we still don't know where we are.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just want to come back on an issue which does get flagged up in the report, which is morale. I think it's a very important part of both authorities. But I just wanted to get an understanding of the position of both authorities, in as much, you know, there is a big difference in the working environment in Brentwood and in Rochford. Big difference. And I'm wondering if the problems that possibly we are having here is a contributing factor, because I've been to Brentwood and it's lovely facilities, everything is lovely. I'm afraid it's not the same here. So obviously with the ADP that would have been going on to try and improve staff conditions, if I may say, within this district, is that a contributing factor to morale?
I think all factors can be a contributing factor to morale. Sometimes it is the environment, the staff or the office environment. It can be things like working from home nowadays suit some people, some don't. I think what we can say is across both local authorities, we're quite flexible, we're agile in the way that we approach things. I think with the plans that we do have in place or are looking to have in place, increasing and improving the working environment will improve some of that staff morale. And I hope it will have an influence in the future. I can't say whether it impacts on everyone that works there, because some people prefer that style of working in smaller offices. Some don't, like the open kind of office that Brentwood has at the moment. So it could have some impact.
Thank you, Greg. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think Councillor Lambourne makes a really good point. When this all started, remember we had two separate workforces, and the whole idea was to get on with the one team transformation. So you put in fairly simplistic systems to cope with that, rather than get bogged down with the bureaucracy of cross-charging. But actually, if I think about it, and I'm sure there's others, you know, there's partnership arrangements on things like planning with other authorities, Castle Point. But just taking it high level, leisure, we outsource, Brentwood insource. Waste, we outsource, Brentwood insource. Housing, we outsource, Brentwood insource. So there will be larger teams there. And I think Councillor Lambourne is absolutely right at this point to be saying we need to start looking at the cost structures, because those teams are a mismatch between the way the two authorities do it, because Rochford has to pay its costs to outsource providers, and therefore we shouldn't be double charging. So I think he makes a really valid point.
Thank you, Councillor Wotton. We've already agreed that point, and a report is coming forward following the review as requested by Councillor Lambourne. Any other members? Have you any questions? So members, if we look at page 11.1, we have the recommendation, first of all, the committee notes the progress of the One Team Transformation Programme. Is that noted, members? Thank you. And we have a recommendation that has been put forward by Councillor Wotton and agreed by the group. Thank you. And that is that the One Team programme be drawn to a close by the end of this financial year to minimise any further uncertainty for staff and in order to stabilise the business. I have to ask you again, all those in favour? All those against? And any members abstaining? Thank you, members. Moving on, we have agenda item 12. Agenda item 12 is the cost of living update. We have, I don't mind with me. We have Kim Anderson to introduce this report, please. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair. This is just to provide a bit of an update report to members, to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, around the work around the cost of living crisis. There is planned to be an all members briefing with more detail in the report rather than present tonight because it was a very tight agenda. Just looking at some of the highlights, and I will also go to Councillor Gooding if she wants to add anything more in. We have continued with the Activate programme, so that's the holiday activity and food programme that's run through Active Essex. And we've got high numbers of children that are in receipt of free school meals, attending those activities during the summer and Christmas holidays. Cost of living roadshows, there was 2 roadshows that were done in 2023 and members of this committee committed another £7,000 to roll out some more roadshows. So we've had one in Great Wakering, there's another one due in Great Wakering because one was on a weekday and another one's going to be followed up on a Saturday. But there are further ones planned across the district in Hockley, Holbridge. I'm still waiting on figures around the warm hubs, but I'll get that from RABs who are collating that information from myself. And obviously we've got figures from Citizens Advice Bureau and the number of people that they're reaching during this crisis, if I can still call that, because there's an element of some of that crisis has reduced with fuel prices coming down as well as utility prices coming down. Again, I can provide more information as part of the all members briefing to everybody. Councillor Gooding, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Thank you, Kim. I think you've pretty much covered what you wanted to bring forward to the overview and scrutiny. The other perhaps was the voluntary sector grant that was also put into the hub, and they, with their £1,000, they were able to support 54 families with £10 and £20 increments, and 154 people benefited from receiving the vouchers as part of this work that's been going out to support families in the community.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Gooding. Members, just so you're aware, Kim had come with the idea of this meeting of a presentation similar to the one that we had before. And mindful of the time that we had, my suggestion was that this would be good for an all-member briefing so that all members are aware of what we're doing with the cost of living crisis here. But members, have you got any questions for Kim? Yes, Councillor Sperry.
Thank you, Chairman. Kim, you've highlighted 6 particular projects here. Is this just going to be where the district council will be signposting where to get advice, or is there actual physical
contributions. I mean, I see on one of them you've got support to businesses. What is that other than signposting where businesses can go and get support, or is there some physical contribution that they can apply for?
What we've done under the cost of living is break it down to themes at the end of the day. So there was support for businesses. So there was some business grants initially, I think, when we had COVID, etc. And what comes out of that. I think going forward, it's probably working with our economic development teams, but the authority and how they can support businesses, and whether that's signposting some other benefits they may be eligible for that they're not aware of. That can be around the green agenda as well, that how can they reduce their overheads in that regard. So I think there's another element. I think from our perspective, we're here to facilitate, signpost and promote awareness of what support is available over those kind of themes that we've got on the website.
Right, thank you.
Any other members indicating to ask? I will just say, Wakefrim had one of the first of these. I think it might be because we've missed out before. So, and it was hugely well attended, far more than a lot of other events that we've put on in the community. So please, when they come to your area, go out there, tell your residents about them. The feedback from residents has been excellent. So thank you to Councillor Goodin and Kim for putting on those events with the partners, who are numerous to mention. Councillor Wootton, you've got a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, and thank you for your report, Kim and Councillor Gooding. I just wonder, against these themes, whether there could be a little bit of a shopping list next time of what those themes mean in practical terms. Because I'm just looking at it and sort of struggling. You've given an answer about the businesses, but essentially that was the government grants, I believe. I'm not aware that we gave grants. So it would just be helpful to have a little bit, to help us understand when it talks about to go green, great, but what does that mean? Because there's a lot of go green stuff which involves a capital expenditure, and we're talking about cost of living here. So it's just trying to get in our heads which boxes they fit in. So here's a question: could we just have a little bit more explanation against the specific themes?
What I'll do is add that into the all-member briefing. That's useful.
That was exactly what I was going to say. You will be furnished with all the information that you need. Councillor Mrs. Gadsden.
Kim, just a quick question. In your all members briefing, will you be addressing the credit union motion that was put forward, where we are with that?
Chair,
I was just about to say, Steve, yes, please.
Thank you. Just to aid Kim, we will be bringing back a report to this committee in March on that particular matter, if that's okay. Thank you.
My apologies, Councillor Mrs. Gadsden. I thought I had mentioned that it's coming forward next month, and I had to check that I was right.
Joe, it was just that there was going to be a member briefing, so I didn't know whether there was going to be any information in that. Thank you.
Of course. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the various meetings and the various, well, let's get the right term. I know Councillor Gladstone actually came road shows. That's it. That's
oh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, the road shows. It would be useful if the parishes were sent notice, and even for the various boards that go out.
I can answer that. They've done an extremely excellent job. They involved the parishes, the churches, you name the organisations, they got in touch with them to make sure, even taking posters down there.
The reason I asked, Chairman, is because I haven't seen any, because I normally stick them in the bus shelters, which I do, and the notice boards, and I haven't actually seen any. So it would be useful. It may be going on, but I haven't seen any. That's why I asked.
As soon as they come out to your area, you will know about them, I'm sure. Members, any other questions
Just, Joe, just a quick suggestion. If we do get credit unions off the ground, they would be quite good to be along to these road shows, to be included.
The officers are all nodding in agreement with you. So members, there is no recommendation. It is just for us to receive this report, and obviously I encourage you all to go to the members' briefing where we can find out so much more about these events. Thank you very much, Kim. Agenda item number 13, review of the council's outside bodies. I will introduce this report. In brief, we had only, I believe, and the officer may correct me, 13 responses back from our survey that we sent out to all members, just asking for feedback on groups. We appreciate that not every member will have been engaged with an outside body or partnership, but even just the feedback and say they haven't would be useful. And we know that quite a few have who didn't respond. So we're actually going to put that survey out again to the members who did not respond to gather some more information, and at the same time officers will be collating that information to try and prioritise. And also, of course, mark those bodies and partners which are statutory for us to have an attendance. Councillor Myers.
So the only thing I would say about the survey is when you actually took it, when it asked which outside body you joined or been active in, there was no space for none. So you had to put something in one of the boxes to even attempt to fill it. So it might be an idea to stick a 0 box in it.
There we are. The officers noted that, so that will be changed. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yes, I had the same difficulty. And the other thing I would point out, you may only have had 13 responses. I think Councillor Myers has just explained why. And also you've got to remember that I had a look before it came out actually. Only 18 members on the council at present were on the previous administration. And not necessarily all of those were on outside bodies. So perhaps if you're not getting the number of responses you want, you're expecting responses where people haven't got experience and can't give you the answer. Or perhaps if you know the people that haven't responded, I don't know if it's anonymous or not, you could target your requests for information. Because I would say 13 out of 18 is, and that's assuming that every one of the previous administration members was on an outside body, which I think is unrealistic. I would say that you've actually got quite a high number of responses.
Councillor Mrs Mason, I was being polite. Members will be targeted that didn't respond where we know perhaps they could contribute to us. Okay. We just want to make sure we've got meaningful and quantitative data to actually make decisions. Thank you. So that report will be coming back to us. Councillor Spearing.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. In the past, I've attended a number of these outside bodies. Can I just draw the attention on page 13.9? It says Grange Community Centre, which we are the landlords effectively of, and it's leased from Rochford District Council. It says the meetings are quarterly. I think in 5 years, I have never been invited, asked to attend, or been involved in anything with Grange Community Centre. It is an issue, and I would like officers to try and address this. If we're going to attend a meeting, they've got to have them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spearing. That's noted, and that's very helpful information. Thank you. So, members, moving on. Okay. I just had to check, Councillor Gooding, because as you're not part of the committee, but at my discretion, yes, please.
So the Essex Heritage Trust, it says here that there's 3 meetings per annum. I've not received one invitation. So if just wanted to draw that to the officer's attention so that I could receive that because I am on that.
Thank you. If it's in relation to the report, please just feed that into the officers so that we can, if it's similar sort of information, if it's not, keep your hand raised. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on page 13, 101, I just had a little bit of a smile. For a Cellar Joint Committee, whoever responded there, they attended 20 to 30 per year. So I would question the qualitative nature of the data because I think to my certain knowledge there's only about 4 or 5 meetings a year. So, you know, we've got to be a little bit careful of this data, 20 to 30. Yes, as an Essex County Councillor. So, you know, we've got to make sure that rubbish in, rubbish out, but actually we've got to make sure it's helpful to us. So I think that's another side of the member feedback bit.
We will pick those up. So members, that will come back to this working group in our April meeting. That gives us time to address some of those issues. Councillor Linden.
Yes, I did actually return my answers, but also the rate amount has not met and I have chased it up. So can we also chase up the committees to actually, you're chasing us up to give responses, can we chase them up to give responses to us of why we're not being invited to the committees?
Yeah.
That will be noted, but it will, in the survey, if we can put that sort of information in there, that will be very useful and officers will pick that up. Thank you. Agenda item 14, we have the key decisions now, document, members. So if you could all go to key decisions document. So key decisions document, members, if we can just go through these. So page 1, voluntary sector grants allocation. Any questions on that? Next item is the leisure contract procurement. Any questions on that, members? And then on page 2, we have the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Any questions at all? Thank you. And Councillor Orton, your comment from earlier this evening's noted against that. Thank you, members. So if we can move on to the work plan. So you have the work plan in front of you. Our next meeting on the 5th of March. At the moment, it has the review of engagement with stakeholders and residents. I have also asked, as requested, for the an update on Mill Hall from the recommendations made at overview and scrutiny on, I believe it was the 5th of February 2023. So a report back to us at that meeting. And we also have an update on the credit union coming forward. So just so that members are aware for the 5th of March. Councillor Sparing.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was March or April last year, I proposed when I was in the administration that we should introduce a 3-hour free parking for disabled. It was quite strongly argued at the time that there should have been surveys done, one thing and another. I'm pleased to see that that has finally been administered, but we were asked, or I was asked at that time, to come back subsequently with a report to show the amount of people who will be using it, where they came from, etc., but no report has ever been forthcoming, Chairman. Thank you.
At the moment, we've got two items on the April 2024 meeting. Councillor Sperrin, we can ask for that report to come back then. Anybody else? Any other members? Councillor Mrs Gadsden?
Just a quick question, Joe. Page 2 of the key decision document, it says UK Shared Prosperity Fund, but there's no decision in the box.
We've moved on to the.
I know.
Would you like to pop that over in an email? Thank you. Councillor Milne.
With regard to something perhaps to consider to bring in to later on to the work plan, is a review of the management and the arrangements to deal with that of the Dutch Cottage and Finchfield, and the responsibilities and funding and officer time spent on it, because it seems to be soaring. From that point of view, I would like that called in.
Thank you. Members in agreement? Thank you. Yeah, it looks like you have the support there, Councillor Milne. I will have to put that to officers to come back to us with a timescale. I can ask for it to come at April, but I don't know if that will give them enough time. So if not, it may be in the next municipal year.
Thank you.
Members, anything else? Well, then, thank you, members. We are bang on 9:30, so I don't have to ask anybody if they would like to stay any longer. Thank you very much for helping us get through a very hefty agenda. Good night, members.